Hello and welcome to Reaction Check. We are doing a different reaction video today. Now this is called AR Rahman, Not Modi, was Karan Thapar's most difficult interview. Let's watch this one.
आप देख रहे हैं Reaction Check.
We all know who AR Rahman is, and he's a very shy personality. Based on the interviews that I've actually seen of AR Rahman and the kind of interaction he has with his fans or his colleagues, it seems like he's a very soft-spoken and a very light-hearted person. Karan Thapar has done a number of interviews. These recent interviews that I've actually seen, I did not like him. To be honest, I don't like him that much. Karan Thapar, I feel he's very biased towards certain individuals that he has on his talk show. But this will be an interesting one to actually explore. AR Rahman, Not Modi was Karan Thapar's most difficult interview. I would like to know what he thinks about AR Rahman, and I do remember that that interview he did with Modi, which did not go really that well. You know, Narendra Modi was not the Prime Minister of India at that time. I think he was just the Minister of or maybe a governor of Gujarat during those days when he did that interview. So let's jump into this one and see what we have. Before we go in there, press the subscribe button if you haven't, because my YouTube analytics tell me most of the people who are actually watching, 80% of the audience who is actually watching this is not subscribed. So
Mr. Modi is a classic example. I interviewed the Prime Minister 11 years ago.
This video was released in 2018.
The interview lasted roughly for about 3 minutes. He then ended it, and after it ended, he was polite enough to offer me tea and mithai and dhokla while I was persisting for a whole hour to try and convince him to do the interview. Anyway, I failed. I left. His last words were, if I recall correctly, Karan brother, I love you. Delhi aayenge to bhojan karenge. But 11 years have passed. He's been to Delhi. He now lives in Delhi. There's no question of bhojan karwing, and we haven't even met in those 11 years. So yes, relationships can be very badly affected.
Oh, friends are difficult to interview. Okay, especially when you're college. Oh, I didn't know this. He was a college.
Benazir Bhutto was a good close friend, and I've had to interview her many times, not just when she was leader of the opposition, but also when she was Prime Minister of Pakistan. And there's always an assumption on her part or any friend's part when they agree to an interview that you will be friendly. There must have been several questions that I asked her, and which I not just asked but then pushed and persisted with, that would have, in a sense, taken her by surprise, occasionally upset her, maybe even on odd occasions annoyed her, because that is the nature of interviewing a politician. They have things they don't want to have to address. They don't want to be pushed beyond a certain point. On the other hand, you're a journalist, you know you've got a job to do, and persistence and ensuring that you get a credible answer, exposing answers that are not credible until you get a better answer is part of your job. And therefore there will be many occasions when my persistence would have upset her, riled her, annoyed her.
Not just her, but
it never became a breaking
people who are watching the interview also.
Benazir, for example, would always say to me at the end of an interview, listen, let's have some ice cream together, because she adored ice cream. She particularly loved Ben & Jerry's. And she said, let's have some ice cream together. It'll cool you down. And it's more important that we get this interview over with, because otherwise it can affect the relationship.
LK Advani, okay. Not all friendships can survive TV interviews, okay.
Mr. Advani, at the end of a particular interview done, I think, in 2006, when he had ceased to be BJP president, and that was an interview that Mr. Advani didn't like. Perhaps he was unprepared for it, perhaps he didn't think that would be my line of questioning, and he asked me to redo it, and I, in the end, said no. The interview then got broadcast exactly as it was shot, and not as Mr. Advani would have wanted redone. And that did affect the relationship, and it did damage it. Jayalalitha is another example. That's also in the book, how she wanted the interview that I did with her for the BBC to be redone, and I didn't agree, and that did affect the relationship. Although in her instance, when she met me the next time around, she was extremely charming. In fact, she literally swept me off my feet by her charm and took me completely by surprise. Let me begin by saying that I don't think I've ever crossed a line that I shouldn't have crossed. In other words, behaved unjournalistically or unprofessionally or perhaps even immorally or unethically. I've pushed, no doubt, to the point at which I've often offended interviewees and even annoyed them, but that's because I thought I was right to do so. Someone else judging what I've done, might come to the conclusion you have pushed a line. But yes, I've often said that I'm aware that some of my questions may have upset you, and I apologize for that. It was not my intention to upset you, but I was simply, and I hope you will accept this, doing a job that I believe is my job to do.
Amitabh Bachchan. Hey, Salah. Hey.
During one of the tape changes, Amitabh Bachchan told me a story about a Warren Beatty interview that he'd seen, where the interviewer asked Warren Beatty about the women in his life. Amitabh said, we all have heard the stories about the women in Warren Beatty's life, but to have him questioned about this was a different experience altogether. And I said to myself, this is a bizarre thing to say to someone who's interviewing you during a tape change. Is he giving me a hint? And I asked him about Rekha, I asked him about Praveen Babi, the two ladies that I was aware of, and beyond that, I didn't know more, so I then switched to his wife who's sitting on the sofa beside him, and I said, do you believe your husband? And she looked at him and she said, yes, I do. Why on earth shouldn't I? And I said, are you saying that because you genuinely believe him or only because he's sitting beside you? And she laughed and she said, no, I always believe my husband. And then we reverted to the rest of the prepared interview, and we carried on for another 40 minutes. And when it ended, Amitabh absolutely insisted that the crew and I stay for lunch, even though we demurred and said, no, we ought to get back. He said, no, you must, and so we did. And it was when we were sitting down to lunch, Amitabh began to show irritation and irritability, and that then quickly developed into annoyance and anger, and it exploded almost like a volcano on his wife. And he was extremely publicly, irritably rude to her in his manner. He didn't say anything that was rude, but he was very rude in his manner, tone and behavior. And we realized at once that actually this was intended for us, for me in particular, not for poor Jaya Bachchan, but she was the victim on whom this anger was exploding. It was pouring out like lava out of a volcano, and we very quickly excused ourselves and left.
This is an interesting job. Okay. Decoding.
I can certainly tell you what is the most difficult personality that I've ever interviewed, AR Rahman. I've never come across a person who is so shy, so positively tongue-tied. His answers were, When I asked him the second question, his answer was, When I asked him the third, it was, And absolutely flummoxed, I said, tell me, what's the difference between and And he said, And we had to do the interview 3 times.
Disappointing experiences.
Times when you meet people who are considered celebrities and high and mighty, and it's a disappointing experience because the reality turns out to be very different to what you had in mind. And there it's because there is a certain reputation of Amal Clooney as a human rights lawyer who defends freedom of speech. And the fact that she was censoring a particular channel from broadcasting the interview and the question and answer session to me seemed like a contradiction. And that felt as if she was not living up to the image and impression we had of a stalwart defender of human rights. When it applied to her, the standards that she was applying to herself were very different. And that, in a sense, also was true of Barack Obama, who is a great hero for the world, and in a sense, a great hero for me as well. And yet, he was so defensive and self-protective, so unwilling to answer questions that he considered awkward or difficult, even though they pertained to things that he'd done as president. And these were the sort of questions he should have expected, particularly from an Indian audience, and yet he was actually getting his team to censor them, to have them struck out. He wanted the list of questions in advance. He then deleted the 5 that he didn't like, and he was upset that 1 or 2 of them were then brought back and still asked. There was an interview with Raja and Radha Reddy, the 2 wives of the same husband.
Kuchipudi dancer.
They're sisters.
I don't know about them.
And they're great dancers. And we interviewed them for the BBC program Face to Face. And it worked brilliantly because of the relationship between the 3 of them, and I think also because of the fun nature of the questioning. And they were quite happily talking about the fact that he was married to both women, and both women were sisters, right? And therefore their children were first cousins as well as half brothers. And we had a rollickingly good time, just laughing and joking about it.
Trump.
If if I were interviewing Donald Trump, I'd talk to him about his attitude to the media, also about the nature of his supporters and what it is that he offers them and why he has this core support of 30% that remains so loyal. But I'd also like to talk to him about his manner and language and behavior, his tweets, the strange things he says in his tweets, about his manner and belligerence, which includes his hairstyle, as well as the fact that he has this relationship with so many Americans where people laugh at.
I haven't done many videos like this, political or cultural videos. I've always tried to keep myself away from the political videos that some of the subscribers actually recommended for me to actually watch, and I did not want the channel to be very political. But this, in a sense, is a very, very interesting video to see Karan Thapar's interviews and what he thinks about it. I mean, an interesting thing that I found out, the Amitabh Bachchan story, and also Benazir Bhutto, who was the Prime Minister of Pakistan in the 90s and was unfortunately assassinated in 2007. I remember I was in the same city at that time, and it was chaos. It was all chaos. She was a big celeb. She was a big politician. She had a celebrity status, not just in Pakistan, but in a lot of countries. And it was a very sad day for all the people, around the world or in Pakistan. Other than that, I mean, knowing that AR Rahman, like I discussed before the video started, that AR Rahman is a very shy person, and you could see that Karan Thapar had a very difficult time. I never looked at Karan Thapar, to be honest, in this type of... I never thought of him doing a video like this where he opens up and talks about certain things. He's always very aggressive. Beginning, I said, I am really not a big fan of Karan Thapar because he sometimes pushes a lot, and maybe some of the interviews that I've actually seen on the YouTube has recommended me were the interviews that I thought that he was pushing it too hard, and he wanted to get to the answer that he wanted, not the person who he is interviewing wanted to give. And I think, in a sense, that way he pushes too much. Sometimes it is good, sometimes it isn't, depending on who he is interviewing, whether or not you are on that person's side or you are on Karan Thapar's side. So he can be very subjective, but his job is very unique and very interesting job, and I think you need people like him to dig deep down and answer and look for those answers that majority people who look up to those celebrities or those people. It's an interesting thing. If you want me to do more such videos similar to this one, you can always put them in the comment section. Let me know, what did you think about this video? If you have not subscribed, press the subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one. Take very good care of yourself. Adios.